Hello, and welcome to my new office. Sort of. Okay, we're kind of moved, and like, look at that woodworking. Isn't it gorgeous? Don't look at this. This is mess, but it's like cute clutter, right? What you guys can't see is the amount of a box fort that I'm currently living in. So welcome, this is my YouTube. Hi, I am Emily. I am your psychic bestie, spiritual activator, historical medium, author. I do a whole bunch of stuff, and I am here to chat with you. And if you haven't seen me in a while, that's because stuff happened. First of all, I got a little bit off of the YouTube train. One, because I went to Ireland on our most recent group spiritual retreat. This one was a writing and spiritual retreat, and it was incredibly amazing, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. I'm definitely going to do a video all about that. And I decided at the same time, because I wasn't busy enough traveling internationally, to buy a house. Yeah. And I did. Here it is. This is the house that we bought. I'm really excited about it, and I'm so passionate about it, and I can create so much more content here and can be so much more connected to all of the work that I'm doing with all of you and in the world in general. Plus, it just has an incredible energy. It's in the same town because I will never leave Tahoe. Ever. I have before, but it's not going to ever happen again. And I'm so thankful. I'm just so thankful to get to be here. And I do just want to say on that note, manifest things, guys. It took me 4 years of manifesting to get here, truthfully. But the first time that I manifested that I own my own home was in 2018, but really 2019. I really started putting that at the forefront of my manifestations. When you manifest things, and I will do a whole video on my manifesting processes and things that I recommend there. But when you manifest things, you aren't just manifesting, I want this thing now. That's how we perceive it. And sometimes it works that way. Like with this chair, it worked that way. I was like, I want a green velvet chair for my office. And I was looking at all the different websites, all the different furniture websites. Couldn't find one. I wanted it to feel like a throne that was cushy and comfy and that I was excited to sit in every day. And I was getting really frustrated, and my husband was like, just sleep on it. Just take a night. Don't look at it. And I didn't. So I didn't look at it anymore. I was like, okay, I'll take that night. Well, that night he comes home when I'm in my hiatus of looking at green chairs, and he was like, hey, so I found a surprise for you. Turns out he found this beautiful green fuzzy velvet throne on the side of the road for free, because that's sometimes how manifesting does work. I manifested the chair, it came to me for free. However, other times in manifesting, you start manifesting something, and what you're really manifesting is, I want this thing, so give me the steps to get there. And that's how it worked with this house. Then when it was time, and things just boom, 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 boom. It got brought to us, despite us having a whole bunch of other stuff going on. We moved before Mercury Retrograde kicked into effect, I might add, which is a win. And even if you move during Mercury Retrograde, don't freak out about it. But for me personally, I was very excited about that. So that's why we've moved, and we're in a new space, and this background is going to be changing slightly. This is like a permanent wall. I can't touch it. This is a permanent wall. That's not going away, but there'll be cute things on the sides and all sorts of fun stuff here in the very, very near future. Be excited about that, because I'm excited about that. But I'm also just really excited to be back. So yeah, on that note, we're going to do some stuff. We're going to talk about fairies today for a multitude of different reasons. Reason number one is because I just got back from Ireland. So I definitely chatted with and worked with a lot of kind of fairy energy while I was there, but also have a lot of experience with fairies as well. And I think it's an important perspective to share my channeling on what I believe fairies are and how they interact with us and what I've been told from my guides, higher self, etc. But before we do that, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for being here. If you could like, subscribe, follow, do the little bell ringy thing, share, whatever, this channel, I would really, really appreciate it now that I'm getting back into the swing of things. Focusing on growth here is going to be really important to me over the next couple of months. So if you could help me with that, I would be absolutely thrilled. It would make me so happy. And I would love to get to interact with you more and have you hear more. The other thing I have to do is I do have to thank all of my incredible patrons over on my Patreon. So my Patreon is such an incredible place. There's so much community there. And I've had people reach out and quite literally just be like, thank you so much for creating this space so that we can all connect together. And I'm just so thankful to do it. And I am expanding some offerings in that space as well. However, my top tier, my intuitive initiate tier, I must thank, because they are truly the ones sponsoring this video. So while I look off to make sure I don't forget anybody, I just want to say that's what I will be doing. But thank you to Alexandria, Angela, Arson, Cheryl, Danny, Danielle, Jessica, Katie, Meg, Melody, Raquel, Rebecca, Sarah C, Sarah S, and Stephanie. Thank you all so much. I am so thankful to have you in the group, and thank you for being the sponsors of this video. The other thing I wanted to talk to you all about before we dive into our awesome fairy topic, we are doing another group trip. It is such an important thing to me, and after doing Ireland, Krista and I both were like, this is essential. This is something that is beautiful and so impactful, and we want to do as many of these as possible, not just because we get to go cool places, but because the experience of getting to travel with other spiritually like-minded people is absolutely one of the most validating and transformational things I have quite literally ever done. And our wonderful next location is Italy. So you remember that video I did just a little bit ago where I was like, hey, I found a magic door in Italy, and on a couple other platforms I've done videos about what it was like for me to go to Colosseum and things like that. Well, now you guys get to do that with me. I will take you to the magic door. We're going to start our journey in Rome, which I am so incredibly excited about because Rome has all of my heart. You guys have heard me talk about La Custa. I love Rome. We're going to start in Rome, and of course we're going to do the Colosseum and the Forum and the Palatine Hill, which we're going to do a lot of channeling and diving into those spaces. But also in Rome, we're going to take a train ride, and we're going to go to the port of Ostia, or Ostia Antica, which is basically, think Pompeii but without the volcano. It is a town that is almost perfectly preserved, even though it was thousands of years ago. It was a Roman port, the main port of Rome, and I got to go there when we went to Italy in this past March, and I insisted with the tour company that we get to take all of you there if you come on the trip with us, because the channeling experiences there is unlike anything I have ever had in my entire life. The amount of spirits and ghosts that are there, the amount of remote viewing we can do and truly see what it used to look like in the past. There's so many temples there with complete frescoes still intact that you can actually like connect with the deities that used to, be the center point of those temples. It's going to be an incredible experience. But then also while we're in Rome, we're going to go to the Vatican, and we're going to do some object channeling, meaning we're going to channel the different objects that are within the Vatican museums and see where they actually came from or see what they have to say to us, which is going to be just so fantastic. We're also going to do a little bit of journey into Tuscany, really connect with our bodies and do some like nature sort of based connection work, as well as going down to Florence. And we're going to do a lot of stuff with kind of folk magic and the history of astrology, and really touring the town there. So it's going to be an incredible, magnificent trip. We are going next May, and we still have a couple spots available. So if you would like to join us, the link to all of the information about the trip is down below. Couple key things I want to mention. One, we have multiple different types of payment plans available, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, the whole 9 yards. But on top of that, even with the payment plan, I cannot stress enough the amount that you get for your money for this trip. All of your accommodations are included, and they're always really, really incredible hotels. Like the hotels in Ireland specifically, we were like, whoa. Sorry, my kids are coming home from school. I keep getting interrupted, but that's totally fine. We're rolling with it. So all of your accommodations are covered. At least one meal a day are covered. All of our excursions are covered, which is a lot. All of the transportation is covered. The amount of stuff that is included in this trip is absolutely wild. And I've traveled quite a bit, and doing it alone without like this type of trip is way more costly. This is an incredibly cost-effective way to travel. Plus, you get to travel with a bunch of spiritually like-minded people. Also, it's really important to both Crystalline and I that during these trips, we really intentionally balance the amount of let's do all this channeling and activity, as well as rest time and getting to experience the culture and getting to go out on your own or go out with the friends that you've made on the trip to kind of explore on your own, because that is the point of travel, is to be immersed in the world around you, to be immersed in the people that you get to participate with and the cultures that you get to interact with. So we are so incredibly excited about this trip. If you want all of the information, again, right there, I'll include the link below the video, or you can just simply search Trova Trip with Emily and Crystalline, and that will pop up for Italy as well. And I cannot wait to channel with you all in the Colosseum and in the Vatican and in Ostia and all these wonderful places. It's going to be incredible. Let's talk about fairies. So before we get into the meat and potatoes, if you will, about what exactly we are talking about in this video, basically my understanding of the Fae and me explaining that to you, I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. First of all, I am not speaking on any one particular culture's beliefs on the Fae. This is not a research-based video where I go in and look at myths about the Fae from around the world and tell you about them. I absolutely can do that video. I'm really happy to do that video and see how that compares to my own experience. If you all would like, please let me know. But that's not what this is. I am specifically talking about the Fae in my experience, which I have channeled and worked with the Fae for literally most of my entire life. It's actually one of the first beings that I really interacted with outside of spirit guides were fairy beings. And I don't want anyone to think like I am in any way encouraging you to do something that goes against your culture, or that I'm taking someone else's culture and trying to describe it in a different way. I truly am not. I am simply talking about my channeling, my interactions, and my experiences with the Fae and fairy beings and explaining those to you. So I just want to start that right off of the top and say that. The other thing with that, sweeping statements are not rules, nor are they particularly beneficial to anyone pretty much ever. So if you've ever been online and you've seen someone be like, don't work with the Fae, they're dangerous, but they don't ever really give you a lot of context. Maybe they give you some folklore, maybe they give you some myths. That's fantastic. Sweeping statements don't have to be rules. Sweeping statements are spaces to investigate further on your own. And if you find that you are aligned with not working with the Fae, then that's fine. You don't have to. It's not like I'm sitting here saying you have to work with the Fae or anything. However, the reason I say that is this is going to be a maybe 30-minute video. I don't know. You'll see this timestamp, but I definitely don't at this point in time while I'm recording it. But it's probably going to be a hefty one. And in that, I'm going to have to make some sweeping statements because, again, talking about my experience is not getting into the very, very nitty-gritty minutia. So basically, this video is encouraging you to please do your own research, feel out emotionally, spiritually, what feels aligned with you, and go from there. This is just my experience and my recommendations when it comes to working with the Fae and understanding them. The other thing with that, if you are ever uncomfortable with working with anything spiritual, it doesn't matter what spiritual thing that could be fairies, that could be ghosts, that could be guides. It doesn't matter. If you are uncomfortable working with anything spiritual, do not work with those spiritual things. Just don't. You don't have to do that. There are other things you can work with. You can build up to it. You can do block releasing, whatever. So again, this is not me encouraging you to push you out of your comfort zone. You don't have to go out of your comfort zone when it comes to this sort of stuff. But if this is something you've always been intrigued in, I hope my perspective can offer you an additional understanding of who exactly the Fae are and how exactly they interact with us. Let's talk about what the heck the Fae are. Man, my notes are giving me a hard time today. You know, Mercury Retrograde, it's a thing, and it's really intentionally happening right now. To me and everyone. It's a doozy, but we're about halfway through when this video is posted of this current retrograde, so that's awesome. Hang tight in there. So what exactly are the Fae? Fae are embodiments of nature energy. That is like the core root of their being. They are tangible beings, though, that are complex. They have their own ideas, motivations, thought as individuals and also as a culture. But at the core, and the simplest way for me to kind of explain that is they are embodiments of the energy of nature. But I'm not just talking about like the energy of trees or the energy of a lake or the energy of forest. I'm not just talking about what we consider to be the natural world type of nature. I'm talking about nature in the nature of mankind sort of way, like using the word in that sense. So yes, they can be embodiments of the shadow beneath a certain type of flower, or they can be an embodiment of a hurricane, or they can be an embodiment of the energy between stars, or the nature of cities, or the nature of jealousy. I mean, there's a million different things. I'm not going to say like there's one per each thing. That's not it at all. But I'm just saying that their entire culture kind of comes in a different place than our culture does, where we are all not necessarily embodiments of those things. We have those components in us, but we don't fully embody them. We are humans, very different. Fae have those sorts of forces of nature kind of at the forefront, and where they tend to overlap and exist within our world is very dependent upon what elements and what forces of nature those type of Fae embody or connect with, where they show up. So you can very easily find Fae in cities. You can find them in homes. You can also find them way out in nature. You can find them not even here on planet. You can just astrally connect with them. There's a million different ways to kind of work with them in that sort of way. But at the core of it, when we're talking about fairy beings, they're incredibly complex and they are rooted in nature in some capacity. Sorry if you guys hear my kids in the background. It's just what it's going to be because the house is crazy right now. Oh, I just want to note on that too before I get distracted too much. Magic also is a nature, so sometimes they are truly just the embodiment of magic or the embodiment of a specific emotion, which are also different natures and states of being that they kind of lead with in their embodiment. Okay, so let's talk about the fairy realms and where the heck they come from. So if you remember that video I did, and I'll try to put a little link square somewhere around here that links to my understanding of the universe video. If we're thinking about the layered cake, right? We talked about the layered cake. The fairies have their own layered cake in their realms that goes up the tiers of the universe. They come closer together. The more the tiers goes up to meet up at the very top tier being the same for all of the different layered cakes that connect to it. A snowflake of layered cakes, if you will. However, they are a overlapping sort of Venn diagram circle to us. So if there's a Venn diagram, whoop, right? Here's our circle, and then here's the fairy circle, and they overlap. So there's certain parts of the planet where they overlap more significantly. Those overlap spaces are the spaces where we get a lot of fairy lore, where we get very activated fairy spaces and activity, where the people and the cultures are still very, very connected to fairies because they're still very much a part of your everyday life. Now, the reason I say they still are very much part of everyday life is because there was a period of time when they were a part of everyday life in a much more concrete way. And that is basically when the circles moved closer together, there was a bigger overlap. It was easier for them to go back and forth between worlds because their vibration was higher, and the vibration of a lot of the beings that can go back and forth between worlds is significantly high vibration. That being said, the amount of fairies that exist, the amount of types of fairies that exist is massively, massively more than the amount of life that exists at our current realm and on our current planet. Like, massively more, especially the amount of sentient life. So the amount of life that can stand there and have a conversation with you. There are way more types of fairies than you have ever thought about. I guarantee you. And most of the time, they don't even classify themselves as types. So I'm not going to sit here and classify them as types. You might hear people talking about like the higher fae and the lesser fae, or the lower fae, or that sort of thing. And basically they're trying to say like the fae that had the more magic versus the ones that had the least magic, etc. I'm not going to classify them because in my experience, they genuinely don't classify themselves. That's not to say that certain fairy places don't have a hierarchy or like a structure to them, because they do. But as far as types of being goes, there's a lot more of like a quality energy from what I understand. That means there are many different types of morality systems and ways of thinking that exist within the fairy kind of kingdoms as well. And what I mean by that is, just like people, you know how there's a billion people in the world? That over there, all of them have different motivations and different thoughts and different expressions and different ideas about how the world and how we interact with it and how they interact with it and humans, etc. So can you interact with some fae that aren't so awesome? Totally. Just like you can interact with some people that aren't so awesome. It is the same sort of concept, and it's really important. And I've talked and channeled a lot about this, both with my guides and with different like fairy entities that I've come across, to understand that yes, this is very much a thing that you can channel and connect with a variety of different beings, and whether that is out in nature or not, that doesn't mean that there's like one governing system of belief that exists among all of them. We tend to make them a monolith of like magical creature over here, it does this thing. Sure, there's some archetypal stuff that happens, but truly every fairy I've ever met has been drastically different than all of the other ones, just like every person I've ever met. So I want to talk a little bit more about our history with fairies. This most information comes from an astral session I had once that I wasn't necessarily planning on doing, but did happen. And that's a whole story for a different time. However, during that astral session, I met with some fae, and they gave me a pretty big download of how the history of everything sort of works together. Like I mentioned, there was a time when there was a lot more overlap of those circles, where the circles kind of overlapped and there was a lot more influence kind of back and forth on both sides. And what I mean by back and forth on both sides, it wasn't that the fairies could move back and forth and us humans stayed on this side and in our circle, even though there was an overlap bit, we could both kind of go both ways. And that's where we get into a lot of trouble, because if you know anything about humans, they like to put gum under desks. Which basically is my way of saying, don't go into someone else's house and break their windows. At the time, people started being people in places where they were guests, and that didn't work out great. It was not awesome, and instead of them being colonizers of people that they could manipulate and take advantage of, the fairies were the ones that could be like, heck no, you can't do this and manipulate. I'm not saying that like people are inherently manipulatable, but we all know that colonization happened because colonizers were dangerous and had weapons, and it was very, very bad. Not saying anything good about colonization. I'm just saying like that was their idea. And then they tried to do that to kind of fairy realm stuff too, and the fairies retaliated, and that's why they get a lot of energy or stories about them being tricksters and being awful and all these different things. Well, we kind of earned them being that. It was justified. They were magical. I wish all of the other peoples of the world were, so that Britain would sit the fuck down. But, you know, whatever. And all of the other colonization countries, white people in general. Anyway, sit down. Beside the point. That is the idea of kind of the history behind it and why we got a lot of lore in that way. And then as our vibration started to go down, that circle space started to get narrower and narrower and narrower, and our spheres kind of started to pull apart. And a lot of things became more like folklore and sort of myth and not considered as truth. And so the fairies kind of chilled out, and we obviously chilled out because we could no longer access their realms, really. And so our relations with the fairies have gotten a lot better in the past years, and I hope will continue to get better as we go along, since more people are more conscious about that now and there's more readily available information like this. So let me answer some commonly asked questions I get about the Fae. I did do a little like Q&A on my Instagram about this, but also I've gotten tons of questions over the years on my TikTok, etc. So I'm going to answer just a couple quick commonly asked questions. For the nature of this video, it's not going to be like 15 because I don't want this to be 45 minutes. However, it is going to be a good amount. So question number 1. Are they evil or dangerous? They can be. Same way people can be. They can definitely be evil and dangerous. The truth of it is you don't understand the forces that any given one of them have at their disposal. So just like with people, you probably wouldn't invite just any stranger off the street inside to have tea. You probably have some strong gut instincts about people. Some people are, you know, people you really want to be connected with and talk to and that you trust and that build trust with you, and you can establish a closer relationship and then invite them in to have tea and all of those sorts of things. And some people are not. That's the same. It's the same. And again, that's one of my sweeping statements, but hopefully the sweeping statement is that every single one of them is different. So they can be. There are ones out that are evil and dangerous, or that are the embodiment of things that you don't necessarily want to welcome into your space. As a rule, I typically don't offer my space up to any beings. That doesn't mean we don't have fairies in our house, which I will talk about in a minute, because we do. But it's not something that I offer. So I highly recommend you also hold that boundary for yourself, because you deserve to have your own space, just like they deserve to have their own space. And you can visit and communicate and be friends with each other without them living in your own space. So that's the other thing, is people oftentimes get into trouble and thinking that they're dangerous, etc., because they're now inviting these things into their personal space, which is just something I don't recommend doing until you really, really get to know them, which is possible to do. For sure. But as like a sweeping statement, are they dangerous? No. Treat them with kindness and respect, and you'll get treated with kindness and respect for the most part. But of course, trust your gut. If anything ever feels off, if you ever feel uncomfortable, back out of the interaction. You do not have to work with them. You do not have to talk to anyone you do not want to talk to. You are more powerful than anything about, because this is a space where you get to exist physically, and that is important. On that note, though, you also, the same way you wouldn't invite a random stranger inside for tea, you also probably wouldn't loan a random stranger money or make bargains with a random stranger when it came to like the title for your car, right? So don't make deals or bargains with any spiritual being out there other than basically your guides. Like if it's your spirit guides and you're playing around, like by all means go for it, but you really got to be sure there. But as just kind of like a smart plan, don't do that. It's not great, nor does anything in the universe really need your bargaining power in order to function. It's either they're functioning in their own accord and you can be friends with them, or they're functioning for your benefit, like your guides, and they're already your friend. That's that. If something wants a deal or a trade from you that goes outside what you're comfortable with, like if it's something like, hey, you know, I'll tell you if something's going on spiritually here, if you'll tell me when there's going to be road construction in my space, that's a little bit different. But if it's something that requires you to sacrifice anything, no. Second question, are they actually magical? Yeah, they are magical. What I will say is they don't look like you probably think that they look. When we say fairies, oftentimes we get like Tinkerbell, that sort of image. That's not it. Some of them maybe look that way, pixie-ish type, but there are so many different types. They all look so drastically different, and again, that's why I'm not categorizing them. I do think there are people out there that do categorize them, but in my experience, they don't. So yeah, they're incredibly magical. They also can oftentimes change their appearance. I will say they have a lot more access to magic than we do. Again, they're an embodiment of elements of nature, and nature is inherently magic, right? It's inherently an energy force. They can tap in and use that energy force a lot more easily than we can. They can also communicate communicate with far more things than we can communicate with. Unless we work really hard at it, it comes very naturally to them. So yeah, they're incredibly magical. Not the grant your wish on a star type of magical, but can definitely do some pretty incredible things. If any of you are longtime followers of my TikTok, you probably, or the podcast, I guess, you've probably heard the story about how they planted the pine trees in my tree to validate me and made me put on both my shirt and pants backwards and inside out. Yeah, so definitely very magical energy there, and can show up in a whole bunch of different ways with that magical energy. The other thing is, you might know this from losing things around your house and asking for them back and having them be returned, typically in a kind of funny way. They do have a lot of sense of humor most of the time. Not all of them, but most of the time. That is another kind of form of the tangible magic we can see there. But of course they're magical. They're very, very magical, and they have a lot more access to that magic, or a lot more types of magic, I guess, than we do here. At present. I think we can get there, but we're not quite there yet, vibrationally, societally, collectively. Is it bad or negative to work with the Fae? No, not in my opinion. I think you absolutely can work with the Fae as long as you're doing it in a healthy and aligned way, in a way that's not you sacrificing things or making bargains or taking big risks. I think you can absolutely work with the Fae. I do. I work with the Fae quite often. And it was really interesting being in Ireland, like I mentioned, and going to a place that has so much fairy lore, which is definitely a space where the overlap is pretty strong, and working with the Fae there, talking with the Fae there, and being able to kind of see them. It's very interesting, but I have met Fae all over the place. I met one when we were in California Adventures, like Disneyland basically, which was very interesting. And they kind of pop up all over the place, but they're, very unique in those different locations. And working with them oftentimes just means having a conversation with them. That's it. Or caring for a very specific spot in the garden that that they like, and you want to cultivate them and make that safe space there. It's been very interesting moving out of our house because there was so much fairy energy around that house. And when I say that, we had nature inside a lot of the time. Almost every week I would catch frogs and release them out of my house. They were in my house and I would catch and release them there. We have had some mice, of course, which is just sort of happens. We're next to a meadow, but we also had an ermine, which is basically like a weasel. It's like white in the winter and like brown in the summer, that like lived in our house for quite a while. We had a lot of very powerful fairy energy and very strong nature energy in our house. And even during this move out process, seeing how that energy has kind of transformed the place, and talking to people who used to live in the house as well. And they were like, oh, I used to be scared of the house. It, used to be spooky and kind of haunted. And then us being in there, that was totally not the case. Now it's very full of nature and full of life and that sort of thing. And that is a very healthy way to work with the Fae as well. Like, make their space beautiful and they'll make your space beautiful, because there's a lot of caring and love that goes into it. And when we respect things, good things happen. That's basically that. Like, when we respect things, good things happen. Genuinely and truly. If you're going to work with the Fae, be smart, be safe, set intentions first before diving in and actually doing any work with them. So you know why you're working with them and not creating a disproportional relationship. Can there be Fae already in your house? Yes, they totally can. It happens quite a lot. Also, you might have some that are connected to you from like past life stuff, things like that. And so they may have come with you or been following you around, kind of in the ethereal, but in this kind of plane of existence and like lifetime space. Totally. That happens all the time. I've talked to a lot of people that have that occurrence. Same with, can they be spirit guides? Yeah, you can totally have a fairy spirit guide. If you're very, very connected to fairies, you've always loved them, chances are good you have some sort of connection, either in the physical with fairy energy around you, or maybe you do have a guide that is a fairy, or maybe your higher self resides way high up on the tiers of the cake, more on the fairy realm side, which is totally a possibility as well. And again, check out that like My Understanding of the Universe video for more information on the layered cake of the universe, because it gets complex, and I'm not reiterating it here because we'd be here all night, okay? But yeah, they can absolutely be guides. They can be helpers. They can already be in your house. So let me talk a little bit about a few ways that I have worked with the Fae in my time, because I've done it in a lot of different ways. As I mentioned, we had in our past house, we didn't intentionally invite some fairies in, but they came in. One who lives in our kitchen. Let me know if you want to hear the story about how we discovered his name, but he's very connected to my husband, and they hang out together and talk and work together quite a bit. So he's around. And then of course the ones that planted the pine tree, they're really interesting because one always sits on another one's shoulders. I don't know why, but they do. They're pretty small, and one will sit on the other one's shoulders. Also, we did welcome gnome energy, or like small fairy energy, into our yard by getting a whole bunch of gnomes. on purpose, and we treat them the way we honor the Fae. So we work very tangibly with the fairies around us in that kind of capacity. Growing up, I grew up in the forest, in the beach, in the water. That was some of the first time I ever saw nature beings, was actually seeing them around playing with me in those spaces. Turns out they were fairies. Channeling later on, I figured that out. At the time, whenever, wiggled that tripod, don't fall over. At the time, I just kind of figured everyone could see them, and I didn't really think too much about it. I thought when people said imaginary friends, that's what they were talking about. Turns out other people were literally just imagining them, and I was not. Or so they say. I think a lot of people's imaginary friends were actually guides and spirits, etc., but that's a different video too. Okay. I also have talked with them in astral projection, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. I've astral to the fairy realms multiple times, talked to different beings there. Had a lot of guidance from them a couple years ago, which really helped me through a really intense and hard time that we were going through and helped me really develop and change as a person. Very much because of their influence. I'm kind of eternally grateful to them for some of the stuff that they did in astral for me that translated into this physical realm very intensely. So if you're someone who knows how to astral project or you want to astral project, by all means do it really safely. And you can also astral to the fairy realms, or they can force you to on accident like they did with me as well. So that has also happened. But I have worked with them in that. I've also seen them in a lot of places. So I mentioned in Ireland when we were in Ireland, and I'll do an Ireland recap video, but we went to an Owam stone, which is, I'll post a picture here. This is an Owam stone. There were tons of fairies around there, and that is when most of our group really connected with them kind of for the first time while we were on the trip, and everyone was really blown away by their influence and their impact. And someone left a little offering for them on a rock, turned away to look at the water for a minute, turned back, and the offering on the rock was gone. I'll give a deeper in-depth story time there, but I've worked with them kind of in that tangible way too, especially in group settings. There's a lot more energy and people channeling way deeper. I met one that lives in the Trevi Fountain. That was really interesting. There's that. So I've worked with them that way, and just whenever I notice them or see them around, I just acknowledge them and I'm like, hi. And when I say see, I mean use all of your senses. Do you see, sense, hear, feel, know, taste, or smell? And of course, I've done other videos on the clair senses. I also have a free worksheet on my website about like what clair senses are yours. So if you want to figure that out, there's that, because I don't want to run through all of them here. But just pay attention to all your senses. If something pings and you're like, oh, I think there's something over there, acknowledge it. That is really helpful. Also, you are more than welcome to leave little gifts for the Fae if you are really connected to them, or if you see, a ring of something or a place that looks like a door or anything like that. By all means, you can always leave little gifts. They like shiny things. They like words a lot. Like if you write like words on a piece of paper, they like food, all of those things. Think what you would offer crows, almost like those kind of nice things. I do have a very sacred box. You can't see it. It's a little off camera. It's over there, that I kind of fill with crystals that when I pick them up and I bring them home, and sometimes I immediately feel like, oh, the fairies want this, and I will put them in those box. Nothing is allowed to be set on top of the box. As per very specific instruction, it was carried by hand from my old house to here because it was very much not allowed to be packed into anything because nothing could be on top of the box. That's another way you can kind of offer to them too, or work with them too, or just show them that you acknowledge them and you see them around. Yeah, that is kind of the gist of what I wanted to share. If you are really, really drawn to working with the Fae, or if you want more information with the Fae, about the Fae, I actually really recommend reading Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. It is a fiction book, but her description of fairies is very, very accurate to what I have seen and worked with for the most part. There's not 100%, but I think very, very close. It's the closest book I've read where I've been like, that's it. When I'm talking about fairies, I'm not talking ACOTAR. I'm talking Encyclopedia of Fairies. Not to say ACOTAR is bad. It's not. You get what I'm saying. Very different fairy vibes. If you've read them both, you understand. But Encyclopedia of Fairies, I highly recommend if you want to dive deeper into this. And of course, if you are more drawn to it, you can also look at myths about fairies and channel in and see how you feel about those myths. Look up different cultures, watch some different videos on that. What I will say again is be aware of like super alarmist language, be aware of super sweeping statements, make your own decision, trust your gut. And with that trust your gut aspect, if you are ever in any sort of spiritual situation where you are uncomfortable, you don't feel right, whatever you're talking to is making you feel not comfortable, or whatever you're doing is making you feel not comfortable, listen to that. I will say fairies can interact very concretely with our physical world. There are things like portals and fairy traps and all of those sorts of things. It's actually a little bit of a running joke with my husband and I. Whenever we see something out of place, we're always like, don't touch it, it's a fairy trap. If it's like, a pair of false eyelashes that are on the sidewalk or something out of nowhere, we're like, no, seems like a fairy trap. I mean, that's a thing, though, that there are, you know, they can attach tons of different spiritual stuff, can attach weird energy to weird stuff, and you might not want to touch it or interact with it. So if something gets that gut feeling or you feel off about something, don't interact with it. Whether that you're actually channeling in and speaking to a ghost or a spirit or an entity or cryptid or whatever it is you're going to speak to, and that feels uncomfortable, don't keep going forward that way. If you're going down a path in the woods and all of a sudden you're getting really lost or turned around, or you see a ring of trees or a ring of branches or, you know, a ring of mushrooms, whatever, don't go into that. It's probably not a good idea. Anything in that capacity, just trust your gut. If you feel aligned, awesome. If you feel uncomfortable, follow that as well. Never would want you to do anything that doesn't feel comfortable for you or doesn't feel safe for you. Just, you know, be smart. This is some stuff that is kind of upper level, deeper magical tier sort of things, and I just don't want you to wreck yourself with it or anything of the sort. Awesome. Well, that's about it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please, again, if you wouldn't mind, like, subscribing, following, whatever, all of the YouTube things. Also, if you want to share with me some of your experiences with the Fae or any questions you have or any video suggestions you have, go ahead and comment them. I do read the comments and I really appreciate those things. And I think it's really supportive and helpful and collaborative to each other if you want to share some of your experiences in the comments, because people really get a lot of benefit from that. Also, if you want to vote on episode topics, get bonus videos from me, get a monthly tarot reading, all sorts of fun stuff, that's what my Patreon is for. All the information to join that is located below. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for tuning in. I'm so excited to be back. And just remember, you are magical as fuck. Bye-bye.